Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we're back with a tier list for patch 5.3b, and really the main change of the tier list is of course the addition of Ambessa to the game in patch 5.3a towards the later part after my tier list, and of course also we have quite a number of balance changes to things like runes, and a lot of champions have gotten very significant changes. So of course I have updated the tier list for all roles, and in this patch there are actually quite a number of changes. So let's start off at the Baron lane. So in the Baron lane, the first thing you'll notice is Heimerdinger is moving down the tier list in most roles, right? Pretty much every role, because honestly, Heimerdinger is still pretty strong. However, he did lose out on a lot of his AP ratios on multiple of his abilities, as well as, of course, the range on his E as well. So his turrets do a lot less damage now, and he is not as oppressive as before. However, he is still a really decent and strong champion, particularly in the Baron lane, where, of course, you can bully melee champions. However, if you take a look at the top of the S plus tier, basically the S plus tier champions remain the same. They all were pretty much untouched. Jax, I think, is still the most OP of all the Baron laners. Of course, you still have really strong tanks like Garen, like Ornn, and like Sion, who's also a really good split pusher. And Jax and Aatrox are more of like stronger carries or fighters. Mordekaiser is honestly not as strong as he was on release, obviously because he did get a round of nerfs. I still think he's pretty decent. Maybe he's not at the top of S tier. Maybe I should move him down a little bit, but I still think that he is a pretty strong champion. His ulti is just really good. Maokai is actually moving up, and I think that Maokai is actually really strong in the Baron lane right now. Of course, he's gotten so many rounds of nerfs, but I actually still think he's really, really decent. He's really tanky, especially because in the Baron lane you get a lot more farm. So he's still a very strong champ. So another champion I wanted to point out is of course the Ambessa, which is of course the latest champion. Now, Ambessa, I'm gonna discuss this a little bit more in the jungle as well, but I feel that Ambessa is actually really not as strong as I really thought she was gonna be, right? It seemed insane that she had like infinite dashes, like one after every ability, and she had a huge long range engage ultimate. But in reality, in the Baron lane, she's just like any other fighter that you would play there. Basically, she's a very fair champion in the sense that although she has a lot of mobility, her damage is not insane. You don't really get one shot by her. She does have to kind of run you down, which is the reason, of course, for her mobility. But her mobility is not as insane as Kalista, where of course Kalista can scale her mobility with her attack speed, so she can hop at an insane rate. Whereas Ambessa is kind of capped by her cooldowns, and furthermore, her abilities are pretty slow. So you can't dash non-stop. You can dash a lot within a short span of time, but it's not non-stop. So I think Ambessa is actually a pretty fair champion. I think she's pretty decent, but not like OP or anything like that. So I put her in somewhere in the middle of the S tier. And the rest of the Baron lane tier list more or less remains the same. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to talking about the jungle. So I think jungle is the role that kind of experienced the most actual changes in terms of the tier list. So the first thing you will notice is now at the top of the tier list we do have Pantheon. So Pantheon, I think after he got that round of buffs in the previous patch, has shot up in terms of popularity, and just building lethality. Pantheon can just gank early, and he can just snowball himself and snowball his lanes, and he has that global pressure, not global but semi-global pressure of his ulti, and especially when you're in the jungle, no one can be 100% sure of where you are if you're not on vision, and that means that every laner has to kind of respect Pantheon's pressure and the fact that he can just man drop and one shot you. So a lot of times when I play against a Pantheon, I have to not overextend, or I have to be willing to trade kills with the Pantheon if I want to overextend for kills in the bot lane, for example. So of course Lee Sin is classic. It's always going to be there in the S plus tier. If you're good at him, it's always going to work out for you. Now Rengar did get a bunch of nerfs, but I still think Rengar is really strong, because the fact of the matter is, with Rengar, if you're good at him, you will be able to find one shots with him, and you still will be able to snowball. But I think that Rengar is a lot more fair of a champion now, in the sense that if you're bad at him, you're likely going to feed and you're going to be useless. But if you're good at him, he is still going to be an S plus tier champion, and he's still going to be absolutely amazing. Hecarim and Vi still stays there. Again, I think Vi is a bit underrated, but I think actually Vi is really, really strong. And Viego is nowadays not really permaban anymore. And nowadays when you see Viego in matches, of course his reset mechanic is still really irritating, giving him that untargetability. But honestly, I haven't really seen Viego popping off all that much anymore, and I can only attribute it to he's probably a little bit weaker after he got unnerved with his crit build, all those times. I think now is finding the breaking point where, I mean, honestly, in this patch, it's kind of the breaking point where a lot of champions actually get effective nerfs or effective buffs. So I've actually dropped Viego down to the S tier, where he's still a really decent champion. But honestly, the entire S tier are all really strong champions as well. I mean, Lilia, Xin Zhao, Kha'Zix, Kayn, all really good as well. Maokai still up there as an amazing jungler. Echo and Shyvana are two junglers I want to point out because they have moved up in the world, where Echo has gotten so many rounds of buffs to his abilities that now he's actually really, really strong. I think he's actually even better in the mid lane, but basically Echo is a very, very slippery character where, when you play against Echo, you kind of feel very irritated when you play against him, just simply due to the fact that he can one-shot you, and even if he doesn't, he still has that ulti, so you can't commit all your abilities onto him. Because imagine if, um, let's say you're a Vi, right? Let's say if you ult him, if you Q him, and then he, of course, probably shouldn't die if you're 1v1 him, he's just gonna ult and basically make you waste all of your spells, right? So, Echo is just a really annoying champion to deal with. He does insane damage, and Shyvana, um, I said in the patch notes that she probably wasn't going to be affected all that much, but turns out the patch notes had an error. She doesn't gain 10 stacks when she kills an epic monster, but she gains 10 stacks whenever she kills any jungle monster. So now this makes her get up to a 400 stacks insanely quickly. And of course, um, Shyvana is a stat check kind of champion, so if you give her a lot of stats early, this is gonna mean she's gonna jump in and stat check you all the time. And honestly, she's such a simple jungler to play. All you have to do is power farm your first clear, get to dragon form, gank, and then power farm back to dragon form, and then gank again, and just really straightforward playstyle. And again, Ambessa I think is better in the jungle than in the Baron lane. But again, as I elaborated in the Baron lane, I do think she's a really fair champion. I don't think she's actually OP. I think she's pretty balanced, to be honest. And of course, I say she's fair because if you get hit by her ulti and she jumps to you, she's probably just gonna run you down all the way. Which that's your fault for getting hit by the ulti, right? Like that's fair. If you dodge her ulti, which is really not that hard to do because unlike Yone ulti, which is a bit harder to dodge, it's like an easier version to dodge of Yone ulti. It's narrower, and it also allows you to dash out of it instead of having to blink. Right, so it's a pretty fair champion. I think that she is absolutely fine. Now, I've actually dropped some people down from the S tier, which are like Evelyn and Aatrox, who are still really good, but I don't think they kind of stack up with the other S tier champions. And finally, the last champion I wanted to point out is Kale, who I ranked on the A plus tier on the previous patch, but then I realized that I kind of way overrated her, and I've dropped her back down to B, where she is still okay as a jungler. But honestly, in the end, all those Kale buffs I think didn't really amount to anything in the long run because she still suffers from all of her biggest weaknesses, and it's only really her strengths that have been enhanced. But you still need to get through that horrendous early game, and yeah, it's still really hard to play Kale regardless of role. So now let's move on to talking about the mid lane. So the two main changes in the mid lane is of course Heimerdinger moving down. Again, I still think he's a very strong champion despite the fact that he got nerfed. I still think that he is a really decent um, pick in the mid lane. But the other change is Echo moving up to the S plus tier. Now I think Echo's Q getting those multiple buffs, it just has made his mid lane really, really strong. He can basically instantly clear waves, he can trade very, very well, and he can shove and roam pretty effectively. He's also a relatively straightforward champion to play. His combos are pretty easy to pull off. So he does have a low skill floor, but his skill ceiling is very high with what you can do with his ulti, with how you want to place your W. So overall, I still think he's not still think, but I do think he is a really strong champion at the moment. Other S plus tier champions pretty much remain the same. And the S and the A plus tier, again, these are all very strong mid laners as well. I've shifted people around a little bit. So for example, I dropped Corki and Lux down a little bit, and I moved Galio up because Galio, after he got that round of buffs in patch 5.3a, has been growing in popularity, and the kind of one-shot full AP Galio is kind of back, and you have to face the facts that if Galio is able to eat onto you, you're basically just one shot every single time. So he is of course able to carry games like that, but of course he's also very squishy. Does have global pressure and can build tank as well. So overall, I do think Galio is actually a really in a really good spot, at the moment. And aside from that, nothing much in the tier list has really changed. I think that if you were to play Kale, I think probably mid lane is the best place to play her. Lucian is now significantly weaker after his rework, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that now when we move on to the ADC section. Okay, so onto the ADCs. As mentioned, let's talk about Lucian first. So Lucian has gotten a, some people call it a mini rework, some people call it a buff. But whatever the case is, basically he's gotten that change where in his passive he gets an extra passive basically where when he is near when he is shield or someone near him is CC'd, he gets basically extra damage on his next couple of auto attacks. And this damage is absolutely insane, right? He now does so much burst damage. You can burst people throughout the entire game. It's just whack, and I'm definitely going to be coming out with a Lucian video, sooner or later, because I'm playing, quite a bit of Lucian after his basically buff for the dual lane. However, that quote unquote buff has repercussions because firstly his second shot damage got reduced, and secondly his base damage got reduced. So what this means is in solo lanes like top or mid, he's actually going to be weaker because losing 6 base damage is really significant, and this means that in the dual lane you will compensate this based off having a support to either heal shield you or to CC someone for you to get that extra vigilance passive proc. But if you're in the solo lane, unless you get ganked by the jungler, no one is going to do that for you. So you're just straight up losing damage because you lose your base stats and you lose your percent AD on your second shot. So he's definitely weaker in solo lanes, but he's way stronger in the ADC role right now. Now I'm not gonna go so far as to say he's no longer viable in solo lanes because PC got this change as well, like a few years ago I think. And Lucian was still viable in solo lanes after that. So I think like, if people say that he's not viable in solo lanes, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I still think the best ADC is Varus. Kai'Sa and Xayah are still up there as well. I've actually moved Ashe down from the S plus to the S tier, even though last patch I was really high on Ashe and seeing how Ashe is really good. I still believe that Ashe is really good. However, I think that Ashe has one main weakness that the S plus tier champions don't really have, which is that the S plus tier champions can outplay people really well. Like with Varus, if someone jumps on you, you can potentially one-shot them. Same with Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa can also use her ult to reposition and invisibility to buy time. Lucian can of course dash and one-shot people as well. Xayah of course has the feathers as well as her ulti to outplay. But Ashe really, if someone jumps on you, all you can really do is ult them and try to run away and try to slow them as well. So the real main difference between Ashe and the S plus tier champions is her lack of ability to outplay people. If you're out of position or if you're in the wrong spot, you're just gonna get punished and you're just going to die. And even the best of us do position misposition here and there. So I do like having some kind of options when you have with the S plus 2 champions, which Ashe is lacking. So Ezreal Tristana still really strong. I've moved Samira up after her ulti buff. I do think that the ulti buff was really helpful in, boosting her ult damage and helping her snowball. I've moved Zeri up as well because I actually think after playing a decent amount of Zeri, I actually think that she is a step above a lot of other champions. In terms of lane, her laning is fine, and mid and late game she is of course really strong scaling hyper carry. And I moved Caitlyn down from the S to the A plus tier, which is pretty sad. I mean, we have Arcane of course going on right now, and the Arcane champions are not doing very well. Being Caitlyn and Jinx of course. As Caitlyn, I think a lot of people do think she's pretty strong. Now I personally don't think she's really strong. I just don't see it. Like, yeah, yes, her combo damage is pretty insane. Yes, like in lane she does do really well, but I really just pick. I'd rather pick any of the S plus or S tier champions over Caitlyn, so I just really don't think she's all that good. Another thing that I didn't really mention is that I also removed Heimerdinger off of the tier list because I think the only reason why you would play Heimerdinger ADC is because he's broken. But since he's no longer broken, why would you ever want to play Heimerdinger ADC? You have Corki, you have AP Varus, AP Kai'Sa, all of these other options to play, so no reason to play Heimerdinger anymore. Now, Miss Fortune, I moved up from B to A because after that buff she got in the patch, and also just yeah, really it's that buff that really kind of helped push her a little bit up. So now Miss Fortune is actually decent, and ironically enough, I actually think Miss Fortune is better than like Jinx and Vayne. Now Vayne doesn't really have a place in the world anymore because there's so many good tank shredders with their on-hit builds like Varus and Kai'Sa, for example. And Jinx she is a pretty strong hyper carry. If you get fed and if you snowball in the early game, she can be a very, very strong carry. But honestly, it's so unreliable because your early game damage is so little and you're so support reliant that if you want to play a hyper carry, something like a Zeri would be better. Even Kai'Sa and Varus can be better hyper carries than Jinx. So I do think Jinx is just not in a very good spot right now. Maybe they're gonna give her buffs next patch because of Arcane. Who knows? But yeah, still the worst ADC is probably Twitch, and of course Neela is it's a very niche counter pick and not blind pickable. Basically, she's melee, so she gets bullied all the time. It's really only good into like a lot of auto attackers on the enemy team. That's pretty much it for the ADCs. Now let's talk about the supports. For support, we have some changes as well. Of course, firstly, we move Heimerdinger down, but the fact of the matter is Heimerdinger is going to be a pretty strong support because regardless of, them nerfing his towers, he is still going to always have lane parity and always have push in the lane, which is going to help out your ADC quite a bit in terms of just farming, in terms of, being able to spend more time and energy on harassing enemies, in terms of being able to rotate to other plays, things like that. Heimerdinger is going to be pretty useful as a support, and your alt E is also a really huge CC in a very large area. So the main thing that happened is Milio, after he got those nerfs, I moved him down by like 2 spots, and I think Lulu is probably the better version compared to Milio right now because, again, I do think that Milio is very strong. He is still in the S plus tier, but I think that between Lulu and Milio, the differences are not a lot. Like Lulu is more protective in terms of saving your allies, whereas Milio is a lot more helpful in terms of getting your allies to output more damage. And of course, they have hit the damage portion of it, which is of course the passive, and of course the range you give them is now less. So I think Million moves down a little bit, but again he's still really strong. Maokai, I think support is his best role. I think he's really strong in that role. And Nautilus, has gotten another buff this patch. I think that's really the buff that put him over the edge. And I think that at this point, I think Nautilus is probably the best engaged support. I mean, Maokai is probably a engaged support as well, so probably Maokai is the best engaged support. But Nautilus is really up there in terms of engaged supports. And the rest of the support tier list pretty much remains the same. And with that, brings us to the end of our tier list for this patch. So um, you know, see you guys on the patch, the tier list for subsequent patches. And thank you so much for watching the video, and goodbye.